All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We'll go ahead and get rolling. We still have people filtering in, and that's okay. Today, we will be talking about ServiceNow reporting as a service, and specifically how organizations who really treat reporting and data as a service really benefit a lot and get a lot of value out of the data sitting in the ServiceNow platform. At any point, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A section of the webinar. This will be recorded, so you'll be able to get access to it afterwards. I'll do my best to keep an eye on the Q&A throughout the presentation. And if I see something that makes sense to answer right away, I certainly will. Otherwise, we should have plenty of time near the end for some more Q&A. So for a quick agenda here, what we'll get into today, I'll give a brief intro into VividCharts and myself. We'll talk about some of the common data trends that we hear quite a bit, specifically within ServiceNow. We'll talk about who should leverage ServiceNow data within your organization. We'll do a little exercise to lay out the path of let's say a user in your ServiceNow organization who believes they could get value out of the data and what that looks like oftentimes for them today to get that value. We'll talk about benefits of insight-driven orgs, and then we'll start to get into some of the more tactical things that you might be able to do to either stand up a reporting service and practice within your organization, or maybe fine-tune something you already have. And that'll segue well into choosing that specific strategy you have. We'll talk about why now is the perfect time to be thinking about this. And also at the end, I'll lay out how we're helping other ServiceNow customers through these types of movements. For a quick background on VividCharts, we were founded in 2018. For those who I have not met, my name is Mitch Stutler. I am a co-founder of VividCharts. And I think telling a little bit about my professional background will make sense as to why we started VividCharts. My entire career has been in ServiceNow consulting and development, going back to when I was still in college back in 2011. I got an internship with a company called Fruition Partners, and they were exclusively focused on ServiceNow consulting. After that, I had a stop at a group called Cloud Sherpas in their ServiceNow practice. And we ultimately got acquired by Accenture, where I spent a couple of years leading into 2018. And during that time, I really started having a focus on user interfaces. I did a lot of service portal work before that. Before service portal was a thing, was doing less exciting UI work. But what was interesting is periodically through my time in the ServiceNow consulting world, we would get a requirement from a customer that would be around reporting. And they would say, hey, we need this specific thing. It's outside of the bounds of what the ServiceNow reporting and dashboarding offers. Can you do it? And since it has a bit of a visual element, it often got passed to my desk and really just gave me the inkling of an idea that the customers needed some more flexible options directly in ServiceNow. So that led to us jumping off in 2018 to start solving that problem. Our primary focus has always been building in-platform reporting software that sits directly in a customer's environment. It's available in the ServiceNow store, and it complements the offerings you already have from ServiceNow with reporting and dashboarding, and soon to be platform analytics, which is the next generation of that. A direction we've been getting pulled into by our customer base is more of the expert advisory services around data and reporting and analytics within the ServiceNow environments. And this is something that, when we started in 2018, it wasn't top of mind, but it is a natural progression. I mean, these are things that we're working through, talking about, helping customers with every single day. So it makes sense that we're getting asked to do more of this expert service work. We are working with a lot of very big enterprises. We have more than 15 of our customers that are on either the Fortune 500 or G2K list, because this is a big problem. But also, if you view it from the positive light, it's a big opportunity. And I think maybe most importantly is ServiceNow is our only focus. Everything we do is in the ServiceNow context, whether it's our software or our services. We're here to help ServiceNow customers. And to that point, we're actually backed by ServiceNow. They are one of our investors. So now that we have that out of the way, let's get into it. Some of the common data trends that we see with our customer base, and really just the ServiceNow base in general, is it very much so is a data-rich, information-poor environment in a lot of organizations. Not necessarily because of capabilities. Oftentimes it is from just the offering that they have in place to their end users. So people know there's a lot of data there. They're having trouble actually getting information from it to help drive decisions. There's also the conflicting concept of we're in a period, both with macroeconomics and also just everything going on, that everybody's being asked to do more with less. So that can be a conflicting concept when you're trying to stand up anything, whether it's a new service offering internally or it's putting additional capabilities in with a new vendor. It's very much so top of mind, not just with you, with your leadership and your organization in general. Transparency. So what we see a lot is people view it as they're running into walls instead of windows. Most of the time it's not intentional. It's just because there are some opportunities that have not been accomplished yet to create that transparency throughout the organization, starting from the ServiceNow environment. And with that, because we're staring at a wall and not through a window, it's very difficult to govern in a lot of the organizations. And when I say govern, it can mean a lot of things. It can mean actually enforcing processes that you're standing up with your ServiceNow portfolio. It could also mean the data quality that you're looking at, and also just governing against your objectives. It's very difficult to do if you don't have that transparency throughout the organization. And when we talk about who could benefit from this, if you were to join ServiceNow as a customer 15 years ago, the platform team, which was probably back then very, very closely tied to the ITSM team, had a very small set of applications in their ServiceNow environment. Even what I'm showing here is an expanded list, but you were basically looking at IT service management, ITOM, IT asset management, and then core platform things. So that is largely who would get serviced historically from the data. These were the people who could get value out of it. As you all are very aware, ServiceNow has grown very large and they have a lot of powerful offerings, which is bringing a lot of business users into the platform. A lot of teams that fall outside of the traditional IT paradigm. And these are people also that are often a step removed from the IT practice and the platform practice. They're running their processes in their apps in ServiceNow, but they don't necessarily have the knowledge, the experience, the expertise that you do as a platform team or an IT team working in ServiceNow. So you think about all of these people that are coming on that are getting value out of the ServiceNow applications they're using. They could be getting value and should be getting value out of the data aligned to those applications that they're managing. This should be helping them drive better decisions. So this is a group of users that you're now being tasked with providing a great reporting service offering to empower them. And on top of that, you're also being faced with talking about artificial intelligence, whether or not you have already taken advantage of Now Assist applications, or it's something that is being asked about consistently by leadership. And you might know, like, hey, we are ready for it. Or maybe you say we're not ready because of these things. These are all things that you are trying to provide transparency into and back it up with data. So you have a lot on your plate, but also there's a big opportunity here and a lot of people who could be benefiting from this data in your environment. Let's talk about a path for one of these teams that falls outside of the traditional platform team or the IT service management team. This person, it's an imaginary person. Her name's Samantha. She is an HR service delivery manager, and they have been live on ServiceNow for 6 months now in the HR application suite. She has some OKRs centered around tooling adoption. She's trying to make sure that people are actually following all the hard work they put in and all of the process work they put in around HR. So she has some OKRs centered around those adoption metrics. She also has an OKR centered around improving onboarding experience. And she has to present to leadership at the end of the month. So she's going to start figuring out how she is going to do that. And she really wants to present this data from ServiceNow because she is a big proponent and champion of ServiceNow. She was a big part of why they actually ended up choosing ServiceNow to work with HR. So she wants to figure out how to do this in a way that really shows off the platform. So let's walk through her path. The first thing she does, she is an HR expert. She is not a ServiceNow expert yet. She is a peer on a different team. Her name's Alex, and she catches up with her and explains what she's trying to do and asks Alex, have you done this before? And Alex says, a couple of years ago when we first went live, I looked into this. I kind of hit some roadblocks. I don't know where we're at with this today. So what I've been doing is I've actually just been exporting all of this data to Excel and manually doing it in PowerPoint. It's not great, but at least I have control of it. And it's just something I bake into my calendar every month. But what you could do, since it's been a couple of years, you could reach out to the help desk and see if there's been any improvements, if there's anything formal stood up. So Samantha thinks that's a good idea. Samantha reaches out to the help desk. She couldn't find anything in the catalog specific to reporting. So she had to put a general request in. With those general requests, obviously that could get kicked around a couple of times since it's a lot less informal. After about a week, somebody finally responds to that request and says, hey, we are slammed with an upgrade coming because this ultimately fell to the platform team. They're saying, we don't really have the capacity to build these things for you for the next few weeks. And we don't necessarily have a lot of training today on how to do the ServiceNow reporting and dashboarding. But what we could do is we could give you the access and point you in the right direction, and you can see if you can knock it out. So Samantha takes the help desk up on that, gets access to reporting, and starts to poke around a little bit. She tries to look around for other examples. At this point, we're getting closer to the time she needs to do the presentation, and she's not covering a lot of ground. The way she thought this was going to go is not exactly how it's going. And at this point, we're running up against that presentation, and Samantha just doesn't have time to run around anymore and try to figure this out, because this is all on top of her day job, which is being an HR service delivery manager. So at this point, Samantha kind of throws in the white flag and goes back to Alex and says, okay, right now is probably not the time for me to try to figure this out. Can you just show me how to do the data dump? I'm going to do this manually like you do. So she gets that data dump and she just ends up doing it the old-fashioned way. She's up late the night before the presentation, putting together her PowerPoint deck from all the data in the Excel file. She's a little bit more tired, a little bit less enthused, but she has her presentation. So that is a pretty common path we see for organizations who don't run reporting as a service within their organization. This is not accusatory. Like, there are sound reasons why this ends up happening. And oftentimes it is priority, and it's falling to a team who has a lot on their plate. So progress around the service offering never really takes place. When you do put some priority around this and you are able to connect the dots for these users, some of the benefits you start to see, we talked about a data-rich, information-poor environment. Well, now we're looking at an information-rich and therefore an insight-rich environment when people can get the data they need when they need it, and they don't have to put in a lot of work to get there. This leads to a lot better decision-making. It leads to really just a more efficiently run organization in general, which when we're talking about trying to do more with less, this is a key. Like if you're not having to go we're not just talking about IT at this point. We're talking about all of these teams working in ServiceNow, and we're not sending them off on their own path, telling them to do this manually. We're giving them the tools and training they need to do this directly in platform and have it whenever they need it. So that means you're looking at exponential efficiency gains. With that, that also starts to guide a broad transparency. At this point, we're not talking about walls versus windows. We're talking about a lot of windows. It's a glass house at this point, and nobody's looking to throw stones in it because everybody has what they need. And they're getting insight into the data they need the insight into so that they can make better decisions. And with that transparency, what that leads to is better governance. Processes are getting embraced, adoption is happening, and you're seeing data quality being at an all-time high. When you don't have that transparency and you're not talking about the real-time data, like how many of these records actually have the data they need in them up to date? If you have to go run that report in Excel and it takes 2 days to do it, that means that stuff is probably never going to be at a high data quality. So there are some big benefits to your business when you're able to connect these dots for your user base. So we've talked a lot about some of the current state environment, and we've also talked a little bit about some of the value you get when you put some emphasis around creating a great reporting service within your organization, specifically focused on the ServiceNow platform. So to do that, it's a combination of a lot of things that really depends on the strategy you choose. But we'll just talk through some of these key components. Rule number one, you've got to have a reporting owner defined. You will never see this reporting service grow if there's not somebody who's listed and is actually owning this service. And they need to have 100% commitment to it. I'm not saying it needs to be a full-time resource necessarily, but it's got to be somebody who's bought into wanting to provide a great reporting service to your end users. That is very critical. If this is a shared service, as far as ownership goes, the priority of the day is going to win the day. And oftentimes that's going to be something else pulling a given person in a different direction. So make sure you have your reporting owner defined. Once you have that reporting owner can drive a strategy, and that needs to be defined. It needs to be documented and communicated. And we'll talk about this in some of the later slides, but the strategy that is picked is a lot less important than having one set up. The non-strategy is the worst thing you could do. You're not going to set up a perfect strategy, so it's just important to choose one and then iterate on it over time. You'll also need subject matter expertise. You need people who understand that ServiceNow data model, but also they're able to marry that with whatever capabilities they have with reporting and analytics in the ServiceNow platform. You need that person who can understand both, because they could design the offering and anything else that you're giving to that user base. Technical expertise. On top of the subject matter expertise, you'll need people who could help deliver that full offering. Again, this aligns to which strategy you're going to go after, but you will need somebody, because there will be times that it will require a more technical resource. So that is somebody you will need. It may or may not be the same person as the subject matter expertise or the owner. Oftentimes it's not, but you need somebody within that fold. This is very important. Some strategies it's more important than others, but no matter what, you need to enable the Samanthas of the world. You need something in the knowledge base. you need training, you need a catalog. No matter how simplistic it is, you need something that you could point your users to enable them. And just to let them know how things work, how things are defined, what they can expect from you and what you expect from them. It's very, very important. And this is something that is, frankly, relatively rare in ServiceNow organizations, at least today. I think that will be changing quite a bit with some of the ground that's shifting under us going into 2025. Tooling and trend currency, this oftentimes aligns to the subject matter expert, but just staying up to date, not just on industry trends and standards, but also new or deprecated capabilities within your ServiceNow environment that could have a direct impact to your reporting offering to your end users. Data quality is very important as well. I think as soon as you start opening this up and giving people defined paths to get access to the data, to try to get value out of the data, you will start to notice they will call out some data quality gaps. And that won't always fall in the centralized reporting team, but that will be a team effort with the process owners, with the HR owner in that case, to go back and say, hey, we're noticing this data quality gap. Let's work together to figure out how to improve it so that people get better value going forward. And this is the most important one, priority and allocation. And this goes back to having a reporting owner defined. If this is not allocated, if this is not part of your timesheet on a regular basis, even if it's periodic, it still needs to be regular. But as soon as it's not, you all have so many things on your plate. And if you don't have time set aside to continually deliver on and improve your reporting offering, it's never going to improve. It's just a matter of fact. Like, it's going to continue to be an afterthought, and people will continue to get less value out of the data than they should be. You're sitting on a gold mine of data, and you need to put that focus around this offering. Okay. So those are the key components of a great reporting service. We'll talk about the different strategies you can employ. And what we're really trying to do here, when we look at a reporting strategy, we're trying to balance the cost to deliver that service with the value you're able to deliver back to the business and all of your internal customers. So different strategies will obviously come with different costs to deliver that service, but also the different strategies will come with different value, layers of value delivered back to the business. And like we talked about, there's value hiding in every corner of your ServiceNow environment, and it really falls on you to unlock it for those users. And I say that assuming you all have some form of responsibility to this reporting service. It might not be defined today. You may or may not be the reporting owner that we talked about in the last slide, but it does fall on that reporting team to unlock that value. So we'll walk through 4 different strategies that we talk about. And yeah, the last thing I missed here. Your goal with picking a strategy is to optimize the value delivered compared to the cost it takes to deliver that service. The first strategy we'll talk about is the non-strategy. This is actually pretty prevalent, but also it's hidden. Like, people will not necessarily have a strategy written down on paper, but over the years, they've sort of formed a strategy. They just haven't ever talked about it. So they have habits developed that maybe look like a strategy if you put a name to it. But in the world of a true non-strategy, the costs from the non-existent reporting team are also non-existent because you don't have a reporting team. But what you are seeing is the costs are then passed on to the end users, like Samantha, where Samantha has to go do this manually. Where in theory, you guys have the capabilities in your platform to automate this for Samantha so that she doesn't have to go spend this time, but you're just not doing it today because you don't have a strategy set up. So the costs are actually relatively high with a non-strategy. And the value that you're delivering is pretty nebulous, oftentimes because it's falling to whatever that person, that end user, that Samantha of your team can go figure out on their own. And because of that, in this non-strategy world, the cost actually outweighs the value delivered. So the non-strategy is the worst thing you could have. There are no perfect strategies, but there's a wrong one, and it's the non-strategy strategy. So the first one we'll talk about that is a real strategy. It's a valuable strategy. It's called the delegated strategy. Some traits of this, just a couple of core traits. End users are expected to build everything themselves. But on the flip side of that, there's a centralized team that is doing a fantastic job of putting materials together and a program in place that makes sure these people can train themselves up to get value from that ServiceNow data. And I want to call out, as we look through some of these strategies, very much so view this as a spectrum. And it will make more sense at the end here, but this is one end of the spectrum. You are doing all of the building yourself, Mr. or Mrs. End User, but we will help you along the way through training and documentation. So the costs that you experience here, you're really shifting the costs from the end users fumbling around to making investments in the training and resources. And that will come from your centralized reporting team, which often is pretty closely tied to the platform team. And the value that you're actually able to deliver finally jumps up above those costs because now people aren't fumbling around. They know what's available to them. They have resources to go learn how to do these things. And the nice benefit is for those people who invest the time to train themselves up, they can actually control and move as quickly as they need to on their reports and dashboards. So that is a really nice benefit to the delegated strategy. Like I said, the value delivered is now outpacing the cost. So this is great. We got out of the non-strategy. We put a name to it. We put some materials together, showed the user base where to go, how to do things. Great. The next strategy is the other end of the spectrum. It's the centralized strategy. Some traits of this is you've got your central reporting team. They're going to build everything. They're not going to let end users build anything at all. So everything will flow through the catalog to the central team. They will get requests, they'll build them, they'll deliver it back to the end user. Training and documentation is less important while still important, but the majority of your costs will come from staffing that centralized reporting team and maintaining a service catalog to deliver on that. The value here, you're really starting to be able to tackle some of the hairier or more complex requests that you'll get in, which is fantastic. What you won't get is you won't get the exponential value of having an army of users who know their data probably a little bit better than you because it might be in the HR portfolio. It might not be around your world. So you're losing that benefit of having those people who have both the subject matter expertise along with the ability to self-build, self-serve. But you know what you're putting out there is solid. You know it's not problematic. And there's maybe a little bit of lag time for those end users, and they lose a little bit of the control, but you're still providing value. Costs might be a little higher, but value will also be a little higher along the way. Okay, the hybrid strategy. So we talked about the spectrum, delegated, centralized. There's a lot of space in the middle of that. And this is where we recommend our customers focus their efforts around defining a strategy that takes the best of the both worlds. So traits of a hybrid strategy at a very high level, because there are infinite variations of this, but you want to give your end users some sort of self-serve options. Let them go build something on their own. What that is really dependent on your organization and your strategy, but they do have a path to go self-serve. And also you still have a centralized team that could tackle some of those more complex reports or maybe more valuable reports or dashboards that get a lot of visibility, especially from the leadership team or from your end customers who might be accessing your ServiceNow instance. And along with this, you're also arming these users with very robust training and documentation. So at this point, the costs are distributed between maintaining quality training and documentation, along with staffing that centralized reporting team. And this is where you start to see the value stack on top of it itself. So you get, I know this is the most used cliche ever, but it becomes a 1 + 1 = 3 because people have options and they have a team who has their hand on the wheel they can go to make sure they're taken care of. So this is what we urge you to think about. If you don't have a strategy defined today, think about it through this world, through this spectrum. You've got the delegated and centralized. Decide what makes sense for you all and define what things those users should expect to be able to do on their own and what they should expect you to deliver for them, and then work from there as you're defining that offering. Okay. So why is now a good time to have this conversation internally? As many of you are aware, maybe you aren't aware, but ServiceNow is moving from their legacy reporting and dashboarding offerings, which they call Core UI, into their new offering, which is called Platform Analytics. It's built in the Next experience, and there will be a forced migration to Platform Analytics in the future. Now, the timing of this is a bit of a moving target. Originally, it was going to be a forced migration when you upgraded during the Yokohama release. And then it got pushed back to the Zurich release. And just last week, they announced that they don't believe they're going to do a forced migration during the Zurich release. But what this does mean is, regardless of when you're being forced to migrate to Platform Analytics, all of the R&D investment you see from the ServiceNow platform and the Platform Analytics team will probably be on the Platform Analytics team or on the Platform Analytics product. This is their product going forward. This is where they're putting their investment. This is where they're spending their time. So you could stick around on the core and legacy reporting and dashboarding, but you're going to miss out on the new development. Along with that, you're essentially building up technical debt as you go. At some point, you are going to have to migrate to Platform Analytics. Every new dashboard and report that gets built is immediately technical debt because you're going to have to move it over to Platform Analytics. And we talk about this migration all the time. The reason it's the perfect opportunity to marry this with either redefinition of your strategy or maybe the first time definition of your strategy is you're going to be doing a lot of organizational change management through this process. You're going to be talking to your report builders and consumers about what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, what to expect. And it's a great time to say, hey, by the way, this is the knowledge base you should go to if you have any questions. This is the part of the catalog you should go to if you need help from the reporting team. So it's a perfect time to take a look at this, especially in 2025. The way we approach this with our customers, and again, we provide software and services. And what we see is, if you think to that potential value sitting in your ServiceNow data, at the maximum, you theoretically, in a utopian world, that maximum value ends up getting delivered. What we see and why we are in business and why we are growing is because every step of that way, depending on the report or asset or team that needs to get to it, there is some attrition to the ability to deliver, whether it's, we call it the 3Ds, the data, the design, the delivery. Through those 3 phases of building a report, dashboard, presentation, whatever it might be, your ability to deliver that value that runs through a series of bottlenecks. And then on top of that, you have some layer of bottleneck based on your reporting team capacity. So what ends up being delivered is a small subset of that potential value. to that large and growing user base within ServiceNow in your environment. But the value you are delivering, however big or small, you are delivering, again, that information-rich, insight-rich environment. You're operating efficiently at some level. It might not be the full value you could be giving. You're giving some level of real-time governance, and you are giving some sort of transparency along the way. So with our customers who are a software customer of ours and a services customer of ours, they are getting the best of both worlds when they look at us along with ServiceNow's offerings. So they're removing the tooling equation from the bottlenecks. They're getting data visualizations from ServiceNow, dashboards from ServiceNow, performance analytics from ServiceNow, and then a very flexible reporting environment from VividCharts that can automate presentations, dashboards, slide decks, reports going out to customers, even Excel type sheets that need to be run automatically. They're getting that from VividCharts as well. And so when they remove those tooling bottlenecks, they have a greater chance to deliver more value from the data that's sitting in the environment. And at that point, it becomes a reporting team capacity, which we also do a lot of work around, whether it's our reporting as a service where we're sitting in as part of the reporting team within a ServiceNow organization to help with the fluctuating demand coming into the reporting team. We do report implementation, whether it's a one-off thing. We also are doing a lot of advisory work and migration work around platform analytics. So we are here to help. This is what we do all day, every day. If you even just want to have a single conversation with us to sort of have this conversation and think through it in your current world and what you're trying to do, we're happy to have that conversation. Even if it doesn't lead to us working together, we want to make sure people are armed with whatever they need. These are conversations we're having 50 times a week. So it's very much so in our wheelhouse. It's what we're here to do. So with that, I'd like to open it up to Q&A. And again, I would just like to thank everybody for joining. Like I said, this will be made available as a recorded webinar. And yes, more to come. We're very excited, a lot going on in 2025. And I'll start checking out the Q&A section here. Okay, we've got one that came in here. It's around the platform analytics migration deadline. And it's just asking, have they named a release if Zurich isn't the release date? So what we've been telling customers, and actually what we heard when this was announced last week, they have not decided on which release it will be attached to at this point. And what I've started telling people is, you're probably safe to assume they're never actually going to make you move. That does not mean you shouldn't move for the reasons I talked about before. Like, you are building up tech debt. You are continuing to build on a product suite that is not going to get any love or attention from ServiceNow development efforts. So we still very much so urge you to migrate. The nice thing is you don't have the urgency of a forced migration. So you can actually do this on your terms. But I would definitely put this on your 2025 roadmap still. And that way, this isn't something hanging over your head. Okay. Okay, we got another question here, again, around the migration. What have you all learned as a good practice for the migration? Definitely a bit of a loaded question, but a lot of it aligns to what we've talked about today. So really, we've broken the migration into 3 phases. The first is the planning phase. And the very first part of the planning phase has almost nothing to do with the migration. It's what we just talked about today. Taking stock of where you're at today, running an audit, which is something we offer, an automated audit that helps you get an idea of where you're at today. Understand what your strategy is today, what your service offering is to those end users today. Looking that right in the face, however good or bad it is, and thinking about what you would like it to be over the next year. So really defining that strategy, the plan in place to deliver on that strategy. And once you have that, then you could talk about your migration strategy. Are we going to do all of the validation for all of the dashboards and reports? Are we going to move everything? Are we going to winnow things down? Which absolutely you should. How are we going to communicate to those users? So nailing down your reporting strategy, then your migration strategy, then you get into the actual migration phase, as I call it, which is going to have to do with cleanup. Like first off, get anything unused out of the environment, align what you have to your migration and reporting strategy. Go migrate and validate in sub-production is typically a good thing. Whether the centralized team is doing it or whether the end users are, depends on your strategy. But do that. And then at that point, you could go click the button in production and say, we have migrated. So it's really the planning, doing, and then actually going live. There's a lot of nuance layered into there depending on the organization. All right, we will keep this open for a couple more minutes. Okay, I got another one here. Do you find that company size influences the approach, decentralized, centralized, or hybrid that gets used? Absolutely. When you have a smaller organization where you're going to have a similar size platform team, a centralized strategy is a lot more feasible. You'll have lower demands coming in if you have a smaller set of users in the ServiceNow environment. And at that point, it probably makes more sense and is the optimal route to lean more towards a centralized strategy. As you get bigger, you're going to be hybrid to some degree. The large organizations are going to need to have a centralized reporting team to deliver on very critical reports or things that fall outside of a traditional reporting and dashboarding world. And you're also going to have a lot of visibility from the executive team because you'll be spending a lot of money with ServiceNow. So that means you've got to have some great transparency into that data. And that is something that you don't want to take lightly. So that usually falls to the reporting team. But you're still going to need help from the end users. You can't do everything when you have 50,000 users in the environment. So that's where the larger the organization, the more towards delegated you will get. But you'll still very much so need some sort of centralized practice. And it's always going to fall in the middle. That is a good question, though. All right, I will leave this call open until 11:50, so 5 more minutes. I'll be here to answer any other questions that may or may not pop up. I'd like to take the time again to thank you for joining, and if you're watching this on rerun, thank you for watching it. And if there's anything at all we could do, please reach out and we're happy to help.